So I challenge you to a duel, a wisdom duel. It follows that if something is a shape, it's necessarily matter.
I accept.
It follows that if something is a shape, it's necessarily composed of particles.
I accept.
Okay, so take the subject, square, a square, let's say a red square. Take the subject, a red square, it follows that it is shape.
I accept.
It's a shape, so it follows that it is matter.
I accept.
It follows that it is composed of particles.
I accept.
Okay, so it follows that. So take the subject, for instance, a cup. Take the subject, a cup. It follows that it is composed of particles.
I accept.
Okay, it follows that it is a macroscopic object with a microscopic structure.
I accept.
Okay, take the subject, a red square. It follows that it is a macroscopic object with a microscopic structure.
I accept. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so it follows if something is macroscopic, a macroscopic object, it necessarily has a microscopic structure.
I accept, I guess. Yeah.
So take the subject, a cup. It follows that its microscopic structure includes molecules and then the constituents of those molecules, even on a subtler level,
I accept.
a more refined level. So it follows that the combination or gathering of, so take the subject, a cup, it follows that the molecules which compose it combine or gather into a, that form into the combine or gather into certain relative positions that give the cup its structure.
Probably, yeah. I accept.
Right.
Yeah.
So it follows that those molecules are necessary. It follows, take the subject, the molecules which compose a cup. It follows that they are arranged in a three-dimensional lattice or network that give the cup its structure.
I accept.
Take the subject, a red square. It follows that it also has molecules which compose it.
I accept.
Take the subject, a red square. It follows that its molecules are arranged in a three-dimensional lattice that makes its structure.
I accept.
It follows that they are not, because they are the parts of an object which lacks three dimensions.
The reason is not true.
Take the subject, the molecules which compose a red square. It follows they are parts of a three-dimensional object.
I accept.
Take the subject, a red square. It follows it is a three-dimensional object.
I accept.
Take the subject, a red square. It follows it is not a three-dimensional object because it is a two-dimensional shape.
The reason is not true.
Take the subject, a red square. It follows it is not a two-dimensional shape.
I accept.
It follows if something is a shape, it is necessarily not two-dimensional.
So it's a shape. I accept.
So take the subject, the Euclidean geometric shapes. It follows they are not shapes.
I accept.
It follows they're not shapes. So it follows if something, let me see. Take the subject, a square. It follows that it is not a two-dimensional. Take the subject, a red square. It follows it is not two-dimensional.
I accept.
Take the subject, a line. It follows it is not two-dimensional.
I accept.
It's not two-dimensional because
It's three-dimensional.
it's three-dimensional because
Because it has three dimensions. I don't know. Because it's yeah, it's a
so
yeah, that which is
okay. Well, so do you have? I mean, you go ahead if you have something. But
yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to express it, but I'm thinking of just shapes represented on pages and on the ground and so forth that we see, right? I'm
right.
interpreting line and square and rectangle like that. So
So then
because
so then
if
if you take the Euclidean geometric shapes, it follows that those are not visible forms.
I accept.
So it follows that so take the subject, a person thinking about those shapes and doing geometric functions to measure or make computations with those kinds of shapes, squares, triangles, and so forth. It follows that they are imagining an imaginary world of shapes that don't exist.
Shapes that don't truly exist, I accept. Yeah.
It follows they're thinking of things. The things they're thinking of do not exist.
Why?
The shapes they're thinking of do not, because the shapes they're thinking
Shapes that
of
are thinking of that don't exist. Yeah.
the shapes they're thinking of don't exist.
Yeah, sure.
So like take the subject, a triangle with three angles that add up to 180 degrees, and a person doing the basic, the basic function in geometry to find the angle, knowing two angles to find the third, right, in the triangle. It follows that their exercise is in vain
Why?
because it is all in relation to shapes which don't exist.
There's no pervasion.
So it follows their exercise is computing the angles of shapes which don't exist, yet it's still their exercise still has some utility.
Accept.
Okay, it has utility because
Because there is still utility in calculating what we're talking about here, the width and length, without thinking about depth. There's many different real-world activities where that's an important measurement.
right.
But but a shape composed of only width and length with no depth is non-existent.
Okay, so take the subject, a shape composed of only two dimensions. It follows it doesn't exist.
I accept.
Yet it follows it is something, some thinkable thing, I guess, some imaginable thing,
Yeah,
which still has real world utility in certain applications.
I accept.
It follows that it is an abstraction of real world applications.
Yeah, I accept.
So it follows it has no real world utility
Why?
because it's abstracting the actual shapes and material objects in the real world.
There's no pervasion.
It's abstracting them to the point where the person who is thinking about those two-dimensional shapes is obstructed from correctly analyzing the characteristics of the actual shapes in the real world.
The reason's not true.
So it follows abstracting actual characteristics of real world objects doesn't necessarily, if someone, if something is an abstraction of the characteristics of real world objects, it doesn't necessarily obstruct a person from accurately understanding those that object's characteristics.
Accept.
It follows there's a reason for why you can do that kind of abstraction and still get applicable real world information.
Yeah, because you can do that abstraction with a perfectly good knowledge of the things that you're not considering in your kind of abstracted whatever concept of what's going on.
So
the person still understands that the third dimension, the depth or whatever exists, but they're not considering it when they're in that sort of thinking space. So it's not erroneous, but it's just focusing on one sort of subset of the information which is relevant to them.
All right, well, I'll let you go with that.
And,
Reasonable enough theory, reasonable enough explanation.